Hello, everyone, and welcome to the March 6th, 2024 Finance Subcommittee of the Brookline School Committee. I hope, I'm afraid to say out loud that this might be a relatively speedy meeting. So everybody cross your fingers and toes, and let's get right into the agenda. So the first item on the agenda is the FY25 user fees review and possible vote. Susan, do you want me to pull it up or are you going to pull it up? How do you want to proceed on this one?
Well, let me give it a whirl.
Okay.
And if I fail miserably, then I'll have you do it. How's that?
Okay. I'm sure you will not fail miserably, so it'll be great.
Hey, I don't know.
But you're going to present it from your screen?
Yes.
Okay.
Let's see if I have success. Yeah. Good.
I
Okay.
think this is actually the revolving fees, not that it matters. There's just the two items on the agenda. So this isn't the user fees, but this is the second item, the revolving fund fees.
No, this is the user fees are the revolving fund fees. The other one's the building rental fees.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Yep. So we're good. Sorry, go ahead, Susan.
Yeah. So in general, the recommendation is to really take a deep look at fees in the fall. We're a bit off cycle. Typically, you would look at fees at that time when you're kind of off cycle from the budget process, and then you're able to help that, the approval of the fees then influence the revenue estimates that you're using during the budget season, and then expenses can properly be allocated. And then if you have new programs, then there's plenty of time during the fall to be able to really drill down and make sure that you're well prepared to implement whatever programs or additional fees that you'd like, and advertise to the community so they feel informed and are able, especially for summer programs, are able to set aside sufficient funds to participate in anything that they would feel they'd like to for their students. So in general, the broad recommendation is to, as we have done with other things, move the fee review to the fall in like October and November timeframe. And then take a good hard look at what's our methodology for setting fees? In other words, would we like to review them all every year, or do certain ones every year and others on 3-year cycles? I know that especially for planning purposes, it's nice to have some consistency in fees, but then there's other situations where you don't want fees to increase in a dramatic way every 3 years. So, we can have that conversation about, what we might want to do annually versus what we might want to do maybe on a 2 or 3 year cycle. So all of that said, there is some work that we do need to do this year. We have BEEP that will be going to a full year program or a full day program. And the tuition that's in place right now is for a shorter day. So we do need to have a conversation about that. And then the other one that we have made a recommendation for this year is a slight 3% bump to the material fees. So I don't know if you want to go, or what the custom is, if you go line by line and especially because there's new people and this didn't go
I'd
out.
like, if we could, Susan, to just go through go through page by page, and if members of the committee or advisory or other members of school committee have questions, then they can certainly speak up. But I think it's helpful, just to highlight that if you see in the 24 fees, and you'll see this on multiple pages, as Susan mentioned, there's only 3 spaces where we're actually changing the fee. Now, the committee might want to discuss if we should be changing the fee and there's no change recommended, that's certainly an option to discuss those. But this right now is the recommendation. And again, because as Susan says, we're going to be, as you see at the note at the top of the page, as part of the overall budget cycle realignment that we've talked about, the FY26 fees are going to be discussed in about 6 months. So, and that will be in a proper sort of process to then feed into the rest of the budget planning.
Yeah, so and also to orient, so column one is the program that we charge fees for. The other thing I'll mention is that the law is very specific. We can't just raise fees for any purpose. There's really specific purposes that we can raise fees for in public schools. And food service and the ones that are listed here, for the most part, fall into that. There's a couple I'll point out when we get down to them that really we there's not a section of the law that permits us to raise fees for certain things like curriculum materials, and when we go through the process next budget cycle, we'll clean that up. But this year, again, as I've said before, we're going to try, except where absolutely necessary, to just stay on course with which you've done in the past, and then we'll make course corrections, continue to make course corrections next year. So food services is our first one. And of course, I think it's self-explanatory. We charge fees for the food that we provide to students. And then the expenses are the staff and the food and any services required to provide those meals. The great news is that since COVID, and it continues today, that the state is stepped up and is funding lunches for all students, and that's wonderful. There are still cases that we would charge for meals, second meals, and a la carte for all but those students who are eligible for free and reduced meals. Now, we haven't voted on that for FY25, but that was the vote for FY23 and 24. And perhaps as part of our work here, we would continue with that going forward and make that decision now, or certainly we can do that in the fall, but at least it would prepare us for FY25 if we did decide to move that recommendation forward. So, and then, so 24 is the current fees, 25 in this case, we're recommending no changes. We've given you a few notes to say basically the things I've just said. And then the estimated revenue. So Sasha, in this case, is the director of food service, and she's the one that provided the forecast for the revenue for next year. She used the FY24 student meal counts when she did her projection, and feels very comfortable that we'll meet this mark, and that the expenses anticipated for next year will be fully funded within this revenue. So I'll just pause for a minute, and if there's any specific questions I can't answer, of course, I'll just jot them down, and I'll follow up, and at our next meeting provide you with whatever additional details you are looking for.
Val?
Thanks. How do we get reimbursed for this? Do we do the outlay and then get reimbursed once a year, or how does it work with the state in terms of reimbursement?
That's a good question. And I'm not really sure what the answer to that. I'm wondering if Diane might be on the phone. I'm not.
I don't see her.
No. Okay. Yeah. So let me get an answer to that question, and I can report back.
Thank you.
I think we can go on to page 2.
Okay.
Val, do you want to put your hand down? Thanks.
Okay.
I thought it was, but
Now it's back up. It was, now it's down, but you're not muted. There we go. Okay, go ahead, Susan.
Okay, great. So the next one, and Margaret's here to be able to talk to you a little bit more about a recommendation she has around tuition, and I'm not going to get into that, but let me again orient you. So BEEP is the revolving fund that we, when we collect tuitions, they are recorded in the BEEP revolving fund, and then we have expenses that are charged against that to offset the costs of the BEEP program. So there aren't any special education costs that are allocated off to the revenue in this revolving fund. the special education costs are, you'll see in our operating budget. So if you remember, when we went through the budget process, you see BEEP as a program, and the funds that are showing up in the BEEP operating budget are all the expenses that are paid for from taxpayer dollars. Then in addition to that, there's this revolving fund. And so one of the things that was, I guess, a promise, or was part of the override, was that and discussions last year, was that BEEP would move to a full day program, and that the additional costs associated with moving to a full day program would be borne by this revolving fund. So I think it was a little over $700,000 had to be raised through the revolving fund, through the tuition, in order to be able to cover the costs of the those expenses. And then the only other expense, you have the operating budget, you have the revolving fund, and then of course we have leases that are paid for through our CIP mini grant, and those under the category of classroom capacity. So that represents all of BEEP, and this here, this component is the part that's represents the revolving fund revenue source. So when you
Andy,
went,
oh, go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead, Susan.
the last thing is that during the discussions last spring, the tuition increase that was provided to the public on the slides was 17,500. So that's where this number came from. It's not something I made up. It was part of the dialogue last year when this was discussed, and so that's where that comes from. And then the summer enrichment program would be the same cost for FY25, and then there's this BEEP extended day program that Margaret wants to talk a little bit about, and then she and I will do some more work on that to make sure that we understand any expenses, where they would be funded from, make sure I have them accounted for and all of that, and then we can finalize that. But so Margaret's here, we can certainly take questions, but
I thought we would let Margaret go next to talk a little bit about it before we take questions, if that's okay.
yeah. So turn the mic to Margaret.
Good evening, or yeah, I guess it's evening now. I saw that Andy had his, sorry.
No,
want me
go
to just-
ahead, Margaret. I want you to
Okay,
talk
so-
before we take questions.
Okay, so thank you. Thank you, Susan, for calling and inviting me to come this evening. I'm very happy and excited to talk to you about BEEP, moving to a school day. It has been a very busy fall. I'm trying to get all of those pieces coordinated, and it's a very busy spring with lots of things still in play and lots of unknowns. So yeah, I went back over our slides, and I looked at our slides, and when we discussed BEEP full day or school day, I don't like to say full day because that confuses families a lot. School day, we had maybe proposed a tuition around 17,500. When I looked at the numbers and looked at what I thought was the amount to cover just like the BEEP SE20 revolving fund costs, I emailed you all and discussed this with the district, that a tuition around 14,000 would be more manageable for the first year. Because I'm worried about enrollment, and I'm worried about whether or not we are boxing out people in terms of cost, right? We have an increasing number of families asking for financial aid, and then we're sort of boxing people in different corners. So that was my thought and suggestion. So certainly it's up to the school committee, and it's up to the district, and obviously working with us at BEEP to try to figure out what the best tuition would be. But that was my thoughts thinking about that piece, because I'll say that families are even concerned about like a 14,000 tuition. So that's been the conversations that we've been having, but obviously I'm here to discuss that with all of you. And I did speak to Diane the other day, and Diane Johnson, she's the business person for the district. And we looked at the tuition at that amount and what it would cost and then what we would have left over. And that was that. And then we can certainly discuss that. And then we have the summer enrichment, which usually goes up by a certain percentage or not. I guess you'd have to determine if that would work. And I would like to reinstate the BEEP extended day program at the Lynch Center for 10 families. I was unable to find a solution for those 10 families for next year. They were schools for children families. Then when we lost that partnership, I was unable to find another spot for them in another school. We used to run extended day. That's how I came to BEEP. I was the director of that program. It would be very small, just for 10 families. I could enroll 50 families in extended day at Lynch Center. I could enroll more, but I want to make sure that we can do it without creating more trouble. So I want to just start small, and if it works, then expand for the future. And that would be the tuition fee for that is just based on what the school-based programs charge for their extended day for a school day program. So that's that. I'm happy to answer questions, chat with you, think aloud with you, whatever you need.
Thanks, Margaret. Before
You're
we
so
take
welcome.
questions, I
Yes.
want to just just go back a year or so ago in time and provide
Yep.
people the context of the conversation around the 17,500.
Yep.
And last year, that was the projected amount, and it compares to the 12,210 you see on the slide. And so that's a 43% increase. However, the school hours weekly were going up 49%. So the rate per hour was actually decreasing, even though the year was going one to the other. And then, Margaret, in your survey last year, you had noted that other programs currently charge 16,000 to 20,150. This was last year. And
Yep.
that the BEEP with extended day option last year paid 19,297 per year.
That's
So for people who were in this basically covered the same coverage
Yep.
of having the extended day, they are going from 19,297 per year this year to 17,500 per year in the following year. Is any of that? That's correct, right? That's my notes from last year, what was presented. So I just wanted to contextualize that versus the 14,000.
And I think for some families who access like a long day, that's the 22,000. And for families that just access the half day or the part day, that's obviously a much different amount of money.
Yep. Questions from the committee on BEEP? I've seen, I think, Andy's hand, Sarah's hand, and Natalia's hand up at various points in time. Any hands still up, or have your questions? Okay, Sarah, and then we'll go to Andy. So first, Sarah. You're on mute.
Who's Sarah? Sorry.
You'll see her in a second. There you go.
So
Yep.
just to understand, what we have that's available to us to make this decision, has there been a process in the past to look at this program as how it impacts, our kindergarten and lower elementary? Is this a program that's in place to also put skills into place for students so that things run better for our kindergarten? Like, I assume that doesn't exist, but I was just wondering if that discussion has happened before.
So BEEP is started 52 years ago as an early childhood program with a special ed component that was over in Newton, but BEEP is technically a special education program that has peer models that supports children with identified needs and then with typically developing students. So that is the core of the early childhood program in almost all the districts in the Commonwealth, to provide those type of educational experiences for children with identified needs and their peer models. So that is where the root of an early childhood in a public school comes from. We have a very large program in Brookline, 24 classrooms, one of the largest that I know of except for Boston. And of course, we are working to align the program to be similar to the kindergartens in terms of curriculum and exposure that children have. But I don't think there's any longitudinal study about that. The original study talked about the impact and the benefits of the program overall. But I think in terms of school readiness and stuff, the studies show that long-term, it's really about the social and emotional growth and skills for students. And that is definitely part of the work that we do in BEEP.
I think I knew all of that intuitively and sort of by practice, but that was super helpful to hear it summed up that way. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Natalia.
Thanks so much. And sorry, I can't be on camera. My question is to better understand the financial aid, because I hear what you're saying about not wanting to box out families, Margaret, but from the explanation that Mariah just gave, it does sound like it's actually already a better option than last year's families. So I don't see families necessarily who are already enrolled not continuing, but maybe there is something that I'm missing there. And I would be more, if financial aid has worked in the past, I'd be more for the option of having a higher tuition and offering more financial aid than lowering the tuition for everyone below what is the standard. If it's true that other sort of programs, similar programs are 16 to 20, I don't understand why we would do 14. So I just wanted to ask how you've thought about the trade-off between those two.
Absolutely. So I'll tell you
Margaret,
that,
before you answer, I just want to add on that I would ask that you answer that also specifically in the context of the trade-off of the additional funds being able to us to more selectively target scholarships where we need them. Okay, just to
yeah,
add that
I
on.
will answer that, and I will say that the revolving fund does not pay for the scholarships,
Why?
because you can't charge other people tuition for other people's children. The revolving fund specifically pays for the cost of running the program in the district, but any scholarships financially that you're providing come from the decision of the school committee to provide that money through general funds.
But isn't the cost of running the program include the scholarships, or it can't?
That has not been the way we have done it. No, we do not charge the scholarship money to the revolving fund. I don't believe that's even possible.
Well,
from
if that's the case, then isn't there an exact calculation that we should be able to derive of the exact cost of the program?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Keep
Yeah,
going.
but-
Sorry.
No, that's totally fine. And so I think to Natalie's point, so yes, of course, there's an advantage to that, but you're not using that revolving fund money to pay for the scholarships, right? That's not how it works in this kind of structure in a public school. And while I agree with you that it might be less than other private industries in the town, this is a public school, right? And so I'm trying to be mindful of that process, like try to make it as available in a reasonable way to the families who live in the community, while still being fiscally responsible to the town at large. And I know that Mariah's been trying to have that conversation for as long as she's been on school committee. But it's a very complicated web of programming that finances and manages this very large early childhood program in Brookline. I don't know if that really fully answers your question, but
No, it does, especially the first part. I hadn't understood that they were completely different buckets. And so that was very helpful. I guess my next question, and Mariah sort of alluded to it, do you have, obviously you have to project enrollment, but what is the cost of running and, with class sizes, like what would be the range of that you think, that tuition would fully cover with a buffer that you think is appropriate for, I don't know, if enrollment goes down suddenly or something.
right. So when I spoke to Diane Johnson the other day on the phone, we were just looking at the numbers. So I won't know full enrollment for BEAT for a while. We won't accept deposits until starting next Friday. People have been sending in their deposits, but they have until the 15th to let us know. And then we'll get a better sense of where enrollment will be for the fall after then. But it is kind of a moving piece because people move in and out of town. They move from being a peer model to being part of the program and receiving the program through special education. And so we try to look at, of the 217 tuition paying seats that we offer to the community, how many of those have been tuition paying over the last couple of years. And you can chart that over the last couple of years, and you land somewhere around 200. You might not always reach the 217 or by the end of the year. The revolving fund has not been operating at a deficit for the last few years, and has been operating in good shape. And so I'm hopeful that the move to a school day will make the program more attractive to people, and at the same time somehow still be manageable for families to come. I worry about the enrollment piece. I'm not going to Diane asked me the other day, did I cover the cost of the program? And whenever people pose that question to me, it makes me a little bit anxious. I'm not the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company. Like, I know how much the program costs. I know how much we'll take in for revenue, and it would cover the SE20 costs, but there are always unexpected things that could happen for sure.
Before I take your question, Andy, Susan, I'm going to ask a follow-up to that question, and feel free to say you don't have the answer, of course, right now because it's coming on the fly. My first question is, and this is just clarification, can the revolving fund not cover scholarships? Is it prohibited from covering scholarships?
I don't have an answer for that, but I'll look
Okay.
into it. I've not been asked that question in the past, but what I can say is that if we look at the model of the food service department, students on free and reduced lunch are still fed and the expense is still coming out of the revolving fund, right?
Right, exactly.
So,
Okay, so
I
you'll
don't-
look into it for
I'll
an
look
answer.
to see if that's a specific, if that is regulatorily specific to food service versus any other.
Okay, and then my follow-up question on that, and then we'll get to you, Andy, is if we're not allowed to do that, I guess my question is, and this again is something more broadly, is how does one calculate, or if we're forced to charge the cost of student, then what is the cost of student?
For non-special education students specific?
Correct. Essentially, because the district is covering special education costs as part of its obligation under the law, as I understand it, on the operating budget. And so if the revolving fund is only for the non-special education costs of running the program and doesn't have this ability, and obviously I presume there must be some sort of like margin for unexpected, for as Margaret mentions, there's always that, but beyond that, if that is the calculation, what is it? But that's again not a question for now. I don't expect you to pull out like a calculator and figure that out. Andy, go ahead.
That's good.
Thank you. Yeah, I have two questions. The first goes way back to what Susan was saying about the lease at Ove Shalom. Did I hear you right, Susan, that increase is being covered by CIP and is not going to be absorbed by the BEEP revolving fund or the PSB operating budget?
That's correct.
Is that possible because of the free cash windfall, or is that something we can kind of count on going forward?
I don't know the long-term history, but I can say that these leases have been funded out of the CIP classroom capacity money from the town for a while, but I can't say when that started. My understanding from my conversations with Matt is that classroom capacity CIP money was born out of this boom in enrollments that you had that caused you to not have adequate space in your schools. And then you had to seek spaces outside of your schools in order to be able to accommodate the bubble. And my understanding is that BEEP was a program that used to be housed within the walls of our schools that then moved out into these the temples and Clark Road because we didn't have the space within our schools to house everyone. That's my understanding, Annie, but I don't know much beyond the history. I don't know if maybe you do, Mariah, if that.
I'll add a little bit, and I don't want to spend too much time on this because, and Helen's here too, if she wants to add anything else, which is just that in my experience, the town holds the commitment to the contracts as pretty sacrosanct. And so they've been funded and they will continue to be funded because otherwise, I mean, theoretically, the contract can be broken if the town does not budget for the funds or if the funds become unavailable through the town budgeting process, but that would have broader implications for all of our contracts beyond any one lease.
Anyway,
So.
the town was willing to fund this increase in that
Mm-hmm.
in that lease. Okay.
Yeah.
So my other question, it was very simple actually. I'm still trying to understand where the number 17,500 came from. How does it related to just prorating staff salaries from the shorter day to the longer day? Are there
My
other
recollection from last year was that it was the number that, and Margaret, correct me if I'm wrong, it was the number that Margaret and Ruth, who was a consultant doing the finance role, came up with based on the budget neutrality of the proposed staff increases. Is that more or less correct, Margaret? That essentially it was calculated based on?
I think so. I
Yeah.
look back through my notes as well, and we have another graph that has different things on it, but that's, I don't know what those ones are like projected down the future. So I was like, I don't know what those are. So I think, Andy, just looking at if we looked at just the SE20 costs and we looked at the staffing and the increase to those things, when we look at the amount, you can figure out what that would be for just that, and then you could calculate on that. You know, I think I do worry about an increase to 17.5 in terms of filling the program. I do worry about that, but that's just, I don't know how that will land. I always worry about filling the program, and I'm trying to make thinking about making the change palpable, manageable, but being fiscally responsible. And that's sort of where I think that we sit right now. Been trying to figure this out since late summer, early fall, all through the spring. So
Anyway, this number you're saying is based on assuming constant enrollment, prorating staff salaries of existing staff, and are you adding staff?
no.
Okay, so it is actually just keep enrollment constant and prorate.
Correct.
Okay.
Well, it's adding the FTE. There are like 15 FTE.
Right,
Right?
it's increasing the FTI, yes, but not adding another human being, right?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Natalia, and then we can move on from BEEP because we're going to have to take this up on the 20th, which was our plan to finish this project on the 20th anyway. Go ahead, Natalia.
Just a quick question on enrollment. What has it looked like in the past? Like, do you have how many, like what % of people who apply get turned away, or do you typically have to go out to try and fill the spots? I just don't have a sense.
Yeah, so ever since the pandemic, it's been a little bit odd, because of that 1 year where we had to just have like a very small class size, and then families were worried about sending their children back to school. And so, and because we've moved around a lot, it's been a real challenge. So like the loss of Clark Road, well, I think it's the best interest of the town in terms of the cost of the lease. You know, we filled that place with 70 children. And it was a very successful location for us. We've moved through those classrooms to Driscoll. We'll move the rest of them in September. But the not knowing part for BEEP makes enrolling and makes parents, you know, confidence a little bit shaky, right? And, you know, you could give me 4 classrooms at the Hay School and I could open 4 classrooms there in a New York minute, as we say. So enrollment can be a fickle thing, but I feel like looking at the trends that we're looking at right now, if we're looking at how people are responding to us, we're having a very good response at the Ridley School. We're having a good response at the Driscoll School. I told you we could open 6 classrooms at the Hay School and we would fill them. Runkle always has a good response. And then Putterham is struggling a little bit because I don't think there are as many families out in South Brookline as there were in the past. And I think that Beacon and Lynch back and forth struggle because of the demographics of those 2 communities and also the different needs of the community. So we have had a wait list, but not as big as it has been in the past. And we often can go to that wait list and fill people in throughout the year. I would like to see the program have more enrollment and fully fill those 217 seats. And that's been the goal now for the last 2 years. I do think the longer day will help, and it's definitely helped at Ridley. For sure. We had a hard time filling it last year, and we have much interest in Ridley this coming year.
Thanks, Margaret.
You're welcome.
Okay, so do we want to go to materials fee, Susan? Are you going to cover that one next?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
So material fees are the fees that we charge town or school employees whose children attend school here in Brookline but do not live in Brookline. And so the fee in the current year is $3,332. And as noted here, for additional children in the family, it's a discount of 10%. And earlier in the fall, we had met with, I guess there's a liaison to staff, and had a conversation about the fees and the rise in the fees and all of that. They had a desire to, want some predictability, as we all do, in what those fees would be. And we had talked about a 3% increase in the next couple of years, and then to reevaluate at the end of 3 years. So, so the proposal here is to increase material fees, tuition by 3%.
Any questions from the committee?
one thing,
Go ahead,
if I,
Helen.
so 3% is what we had in the past, and that seemed, reasonable. So I would support it.
And just as Susan said, we had discussions with the materials fee liaisons about it. So that's something we had talked about with them earlier in the year and had proposed. So I think so. Okay, go ahead, Susan.
Okay, and we can drop some of these, like lost book revolving fund again is the provision in the law that allows us to have a revolving fund so that if students lose a book or that they pay a replacement cost and then we go and buy the book and charge it against the revolving fund. So it's kind of an in and out type of scenario. So there's no fee to set with that, and there never will be. So here, middle school intramurals. Again, we're not recommending any changes to middle school intramurals or athletics. Something maybe we want to take a deeper look at when we have more time in the fall. But for FY25, we'd like to keep the fees the same. And when you look at the revenue, I had shared the revolving fund information with you at the last school committee meeting. And what you'll notice if you look at the athletic revolving fund is that they closed FY23 having raised just a little shy of 455,000. And then in the FY24 budget, there was a projection or hoped for income of about 510. And it doesn't look like we're going to meet that mark. So for FY25, we're reducing the revenue estimate back down to the 455. And as Diane has more time and is working with Kyle, who's relatively new as well, they'll better be able to provide us with some recommendations next year, especially as we close this year and we'll have 2 years worth of some solid revenue information. So just to mention there, I'll hold those two together and see if there's any questions about that, or if you'd like me to, dig in and.
Let's keep going. If anyone has any questions on this page, again, it's no changes recommended.
Yeah, no, when you do look into it, can you see for how many years we've had $300 as the amount?
It was in our discussions last year. It's been a long time. It was
That's
in
my
yeah.
sense.
It's been like 8 or 10 years. I can't remember right
Yeah.
now, but it's been a long time. And again, as Susan, as is noted there, we had a significant conversation about it. And Kyle asked for a year to basically be able to understand the dynamics of the different programs and to come up with something. It hasn't happened by this point, but again, it would be really good to address that. And then I would just also highlight that all the way over in the right, the estimated revenue, it has an 85% collection rate, and that has to do with the issues around the checks as opposed to using Family ID or to collect online payment for sports. So both of those things would be really great to sort out for the following year.
Yeah, and another thing we want to take a look at, and again, this is all just time, is, when we look at how much we're funding for students who can't afford to participate if we don't cover it by the school committee funds, what percentage goes to BEEP, students, what percentage is going to athletics. We don't really have that information handy, and that also I think would be an important piece of data to have in each of these programs: food service, athletics, and all of the other programs that we're making contributions on behalf of students who can't afford to participate in the programs otherwise. So. And Diane and Kyle have been meeting and really trying to dig into this. So I feel really good that in the fall, we'll be able to have a much deeper and what a clearer picture and therefore deeper discussion on the total cost of athletics and the revenue picture. So then summer school programs at the high school, my understanding is this is what we typically call in the field credit recovery. And this is the, we're not requesting any additional change in the fees there.
I would just flag on that one, Susan, that we had talked last year. I don't know if there's a summer school director in place at this point, but we had talked last year about really modifying those fees, and that's part of why we'd wanted to have the preview review of summer programs. But again, I think that when we did that a couple of months ago, there was no one in place to talk about the summer school programming at that point, as I understand. So I think this is something, again, we want to flag for the future to talk about what this program looks like. And if you recall in the budget guidelines, one of our guidelines is about more robust summer programming, and that ties in with this revolver. But again, that's a multi-year project that we're all working towards.
Yeah, okay, great.
Yeah. Helen, go ahead.
So this is the high school summer programming, not necessarily the other programming.
Right, we talked in the guidelines, we talked about all ages of summer programming. It was not just K-8.
Right. Okay. The other piece that has been an issue with the summer school program is it's not just for credit recovery, it's also for classes that kids might want to take that they can't take during the year. And many out-of-district kids, apply and come to take some courses. The program has generally run at a deficit. And so I think it's something to keep an eye on. And I mean, we have to provide it to a certain amount, but I think we need to look at it very closely.
Okay. And we can take a deeper dive into that with that information you're sharing with me now, for the upcoming meeting on the 20th. So I'll make note of that.
I don't think this is something you're going to sort out on by the 20th. And I personally think we can just leave it the way it is.
Oh, yeah, I don't have a problem with
and if I recall correctly, I think the revolver is in a positive situation right now, even.
Yeah,
I don't,
yeah.
So I guess I'm not too, I think that there's broader questions though that we have about, and Helen's alluding a little bit to it about, for students, and this is in the guidelines for students who, for example, are doing learning center in one of their blocks during the year and would love to be able to do an elective. There's just a whole bunch of questions about what summer school looks like and what its purpose is, but we don't have to figure that out for the 20th.
Okay.
Go ahead and keep going. I have a goal that we're going to get out of here by definitely no later than 6 o'clock and hopefully 5:50, which is in 6 minutes.
You can pull it off, Mariah.
We can do it.
Yeah. Okay, so for visual arts and career and tech ed, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, that there are a couple of revolving funds that really, are not ones that are permissible under the law, and these two are in that category. So when we build our budget next year, and the fee schedule, will be dropping these two. You can't, if something is a core part of your curriculum, you cannot charge a fee for it. That's the law. So we will not, after this year, FY25, we will build these expenses into the budget, and we will eliminate these two revolving funds. So not really
Thank you.
The next one is the Tappan Green restaurant run by the students, and no changes. We're not recommending any changes in the fees charged for breakfast or lunch there. And the use of facility, I don't have that handy, but I know that Betsy does have that if you want to take a look at it. But you did a major overhaul your use of facility schedule, and we're not recommending any changes. And it's in the material. And if you'd like to look at it, we can certainly do that. The revenue estimated here was provided by the operations department based on what they're billing out and collecting. And so again, we're in the middle of the first year of this new fee structure. And so some of this is, projecting, and we have had, from my understanding in conversations, that we've had a few a few organizations that were using our facilities that are not any longer using our facilities. And there may be others that want to use our facilities that hadn't in the past. So this will be another one we'll want to keep an eye on as we close the year, since you restructured the fee schedule, what is that number really going to look like moving forward? So we don't really have a baseline yet, but based on what's being billed out and what we can see, this is the best estimate for next year based on what we're seeing for the current year. And then the academic testing fees, this is ACT, PSAT, and AP exams. We do not set these. This is more informational. Of course, the college boards are the ones that set these. These are the fees that when we looked up online are the fees that are set for next year. So that's that. How'd I do?
You did great. One thing I wondered actually is if you look in the FY24, the $20 is for the pre-ACT, but then in 25 it's for the ACT. And I think that's apples and oranges. So we might just want to double check. Because especially where that fee went up so much, it might be that the pre-ACT is still low. Like
Yeah.
if you were looking them up, right? So maybe you can just double check
Will
which
do.
ones we're charging for and actually how much they are. Thanks.
Mariah,
Yes,
can I just say one thing about
of
the use of
course.
building fees?
You have
Thank
3 minutes.
Yeah, I'll do less. I just want to make sure that Driscoll is updated because that's going to be a prime area for rentals.
It was updated last year.
It was?
Yep.
The new building. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
So if I can just do the last footnote is that there were 3 items that appeared last year. I just want to call it out that aren't here anymore because you don't really, we don't charge fees for them. So one is the South Brookline bus service. We don't charge fees for that. And so therefore they're not showing up anymore. And then there were 2 that were in here that aren't that we charge fees for, but in fact we pay the fees. So that seemed odd, so I pulled them out because you're not setting fees that we pay, we're setting fees that we charge. So just wanted to note that in case somebody was comparing last year's document to this year's document and the reason why they're not appearing in this document. So that's it.
Great. So we'll come back on the 20th. Susan, is it possible to, I don't think we've ever gotten, just speaking of the South Brookline bus service, we had estimates of usage and estimates of cost, but we never actually got, I don't believe, the actual. I think we had estimated it last year and I can pull it up really quickly at costing 380,000. And I think that was based on 4 buses. But it would be really great to actually know what that cost, because I don't think we've heard that. Have we, Helen? Anywhere heard the actual cost? No.
No.
So
The budget was increased by $200,000 for the buses, or at least the information that I received from Ruth was a $200,000 addition for that. But
okay, well, we
idea
can
is
double check
estimate.
whatever it was and maybe
I can give you ridership too. I can give you
yeah,
that.
it would just be great to know. We had estimated number of riders and the cost, and it would be great to know what that ended up at. Maybe for the 20th, just because it's on this topic of revolvers and all that.
No problem.
Betsy, is that something you can throw on the agenda for the 20th too? Just an
Absolutely.
update? Okay.
Yep.
Great. Okay. It's 3:49. It's 5:49. And we're gonna wrap up 40 minutes early unless there's anything else that anybody wants to say. Betsy, do you mind actually, I should have asked this earlier. Do you mind I'll ask if any of the attendees would like to make a comment. And I think if you could just make sure that they can raise their virtual hands.
Yes, they can now.
Okay, if anyone has a comment, we'll give it 5 seconds or so for people to have that chance. But keeping in mind that they can also always email us and they can also come to make a comment at the 20th as well, which is where the next version of this will be presented. Okay, it's 5:50. We are wrapping up. Thank you, everybody. And we'll see many of you tomorrow night at school committee. Good night.
Good night.